My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence. My goal is to explore the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. In addition to leadership, I like to discuss mental health, PTSD, and overcoming adversity. If you have a favorite episode, I would love to hear about it. Message me through social media or my website, and I will share some free tools to help you achieve your goals. Please like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you haven't purchased your copy of my book, Fireproof, please grab a copy today. Thanks for listening. Today, I'm speaking with Seth Earley. He is a sought-after speaker, writer, and influencer. He is the author of The AI-Powered Enterprise from Lifetree Media, which was released in April 2020. In 2021, the book received the Axiom Business Book Silver Medal in the Artificial Intelligence, Robotics, Algorithms category. He's an expert with 20-plus years of experience in knowledge strategy, data and information architecture, search-based applications, and information findability solutions. Seth has worked with a diverse roster of Fortune 1000 companies, helping them to achieve higher levels of operating performance by making information more findable, usable, and valuable through integrated enterprise architectures supporting analytics, e-commerce, and customer experience applications. He has a whole list of publications, different magazines that he's been in. He is a former editor. He wrote a regular column on data analytics and information access. Well, let's just dig in. I mean, your expertise is widely acknowledged. So let's dig in and man, Seth, thank you so much for coming on and agreeing to have this conversation with me.
Thank you, Dave. It's great to be here. And I didn't mean to have you list all those accolades, right? I mean, who cares? It's like, what can you do for me today? Right?
I think it's pretty impressive. That's why I read the whole thing, because
thank you.
I'm really impressed with your bio and just the list of things that you've accomplished. But more importantly, before we even started recording, one of the things that we touched on is, you've had your fair share of failures, and this level of success doesn't just get handed to you. You've got to work for it, and sometimes failure is the best teacher. So
oh yeah. People used to say, well, when you fail and you have adversity, it builds character. And I would say, you know what? I have enough character now. Thank you. I don't need more failure. But somehow failure comes to find me.
Well, it seems that all those that are achieving or attempting to achieve more, those that are pushing themselves beyond their comfort level, those are the ones that achieve greater levels of awesomeness. And they're the ones putting themselves out there and risking and most likely to fail.
That's right. And I think in a way, if you don't fail, you're really not trying hard enough. Like you really got to, as you say, you got to get outside your comfort zone. And the only way to do something new is to stretch yourself, right? And to say, well, I haven't done this and I'm afraid I might fail. But you know what? You got to embrace failure. You got to say, you know what? I may not get it right, but I'm going to keep going. And if I get up and I, swing again, as long as you can keep going up to bat, what's failure? What's failure? As long as you can keep getting up and doing it again and trying again, there's really no such thing as failure. I like to say you win or you learn, right? You win or you learn. Failure is really a learning, and that's all there is to it. And the only way to be able to get to know some new capability, some new business, some new, educational achievement, whatever it is, some new service, you got to try, and you can't be afraid to fail. Most people are just really afraid of that failure. They're afraid of what other people will think. But you know what? You can't worry about that. You can't care about what people will think if you don't knock it out of the park, or if you don't hit it, or even if you strike out. It's like, you can't worry about that. You have to say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this for me. I'm going to do it for my family. I'm going to do it for my community. I'm going to do it for my country. I'm going to do it for whatever higher purpose you have, and not worry about the bumps in the road and the obstacles. And I hit them all the time. I had some last week. It's like a daily thing, man. You're always going to hit disappointments. You're always going to have things that don't go the way you want them to. And you just got to be able to embrace that. And that's kind of how I've done things really my whole life.
Let's dig into that. Let's dig into the beginning of your life.
Sure.
Where were you born and raised, and what was your early life like?
So, I was born in New York, and I'm not ashamed to share that my background was not the best, right? My parents both had some issues, and they struggled. My father struggled with alcohol. My mother struggled with prescription medications back in the 60s and the 70s, when all that stuff was like candy, right? And so that wasn't a good start. It was not a good upbringing. But I think everybody can identify with adversity. Everybody can identify. Nobody has a perfect upbringing. Nobody has a life that's rainbows and unicorns. So I started with a lot of adversity. And I started with kind of an ability to fend for myself. I was a latchkey kid before there were latchkey kids. And so it was interesting, but it's made me who I am today. I mean, it was not very happy growing up, and it wasn't until I was a teenager that I started to get some support from people who from public sources, not from home, but from people who cared about me. I went to a school that was kind of a charter school, and that's the first time I met people who really took an interest in me. And I was failing all my subjects. I was I like to say I had consecutive life sentences of major detention, meaning I could never get out of major detention. Like there was nothing else they could do, because all my whole year was filled up with detention. It's like you have no other way to go, right? So I didn't care, and because I didn't feel like anybody cared about me. And it wasn't until there were people around me who saw my potential and saw my ability, and they started caring about me, and that's when I started caring. And so that's something that kids need today more than anything. They need people who can be role models. They need people who can stand up for them. They need people to pay attention to them and hear them and listen to them and help them understand that they are valuable and that they have abilities and that they can do the things they want to do. A lot of kids just don't grow up with that. I mean, if you grow up with that, that's great. Then you can build on that. But, you're always going to have adversity. But, a lot of kids just these days, especially in underrepresented populations, they don't have the support, they don't have the background, they don't have the foundation. But it can still strengthen your character, but it can be a tough road.
How old were you when you first started getting some one-on-one attention and feeling that somebody who cared about you and cared about your success?
Probably when I was around 14. We moved from New York right when I was in 7th grade. I also went to a school in New York where I was a minority. I was one of the only white kids in my class. It was all I was the minority, and and so that gave me a different perspective too, right? But then I came to Boston, and I had a New York accent, and it was very different culture, and it was really it was a culture shock. And I was not it was very cliquish, and they had all they were into hockey. I never played hockey. They talked funny. I talked funny, right? And so it made it even more difficult. And I stood out by being funny. I stood out by getting in trouble in class. But it wasn't until I switched to this other school that I started getting really one-on-one attention. I started getting teachers that could see that I had potential, and could start to relate to me and start to break through, because I wrote everything off. I was like, I don't care, I'm not going to do it. And and I had trouble. I had a lot of challenges. It was not easy, but it was at that time between my age 14 and 16 that I really started to get a sense of self and get a sense that I could be successful. I remember my parents used to say that they didn't have money to put me through college, so I wasn't going to go to college. Or if I went to college, it had to be an athletic scholarship, but then they wouldn't let me play football. So, but it was hard because I always thought, I just wanted to go to vocational high school, which would have been fine too. But I ended up going to college, and I ended up, actually interested in science, and I got a degree in chemistry, of all things. I never worked in chemistry, but some of my clients are in the life sciences space. But yeah, it was quite a journey, through those years. Those were very, very difficult. And you still have baggage. Everybody carries baggage, throughout your life from your, you spend the what do they spend the I spent the last 40 years or 50 years overcoming the first 15, right? or 10. So work in progress, work in progress. I'm probably oversharing here, but who cares?
Yeah, no, this is great. So many of the conversations I've had on here, this definitely wasn't where I thought it was going to go. It's always that preconceived notion of, seeing a white guy that has been very successful. I mean, I automatically thought that you had a pretty great life growing up, and I was thinking maybe there was some coaches out there, and your football team that had mentored you along with your father. This was,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when I've talked to some really, really interesting people, very successful people, and it seems the ones that have achieved some of the greatest, well, really accomplished authors, really accomplished entrepreneurs. Their early life was not easy.
Yeah.
And it was, maybe that adversity that really developed that drive to achieve more.
Yeah. Yeah. Number one, you learn resilience, right? Because it's not, you just learn to deal with disappointment. You learn to deal with your emotions, and sometimes not in a great way, but but you learn to handle adversity, right? And everybody has adversity, and even people, like you say, you think, you look at my accomplishments in my book and my business and blah 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 blah, and you say, oh wow, this guy must have had this awesome upbringing. But that's not always the case, right? And you can't tell, but I think when you really dig deep for anybody, there's always trauma in people's lives, right? There's always trauma in people's lives, and none of us kind of escapes without it. and it, even if you have a great upbringing, right? There's still stuff that that affects you, and that's just the nature of the beast. That's called being a human being. But yeah, it taught me a lot, and I think it gave me a drive, and also I wanted to achieve something. I wanted to excel. I wanted to build something. I wanted to help people. I wanted to do something with what I had gone through. And still learning how to help people. But I think maybe sharing here is a good avenue for that.
Well, at what point did you know that you wanted to go into artificial intelligence?
Well, this is a really good question, right? Because artificial intelligence didn't kind of really exist back when I started my business, right? It was more information management. And yeah, AI has been around for a long time. Like one of the things about artificial intelligence is it's really not that mysterious, right? People make it, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of noise, a lot of nonsense. There's a lot of BS out there in the marketplace. And I have a joke. How do you tell, do you know the difference between an AI software salesperson and a used car salesperson? Do you know the difference?
No.
The used car salesperson knows when they're lying. People don't know what AI is. Even the people selling it don't know what it is, right? And they label everything as AI. And back in the day when AI was kind of emerging, one of the first applications for artificial intelligence was word processing. Word, right? Like laying out a document, because you took a typesetter's expertise and you translate it into a program that could automatically apply all of that knowledge and expertise and ability to lay out a nice document, and you could just do it, very easily. That used to not be the case, right? You used to have, typesetters, and you used to have your special codes and all this stuff. So spell check. So, the joke used to be that back in the day, no AI worked, because as soon as it worked, they called it something else. Like voice recognition is AI, right? Spell check is AI. Word processing is AI. There's AI in a lot of stuff. Search is AI. In fact, machine learning has been part of search for decades, right? And, there's been a lot of advances and there's been a lot of changes, but, you can kind of think of it in a couple of simple ways. One type of AI helps you deal with a lot of data, like a lot of information. Let's say you have all these bank transactions, or you have all these loan applications or something like that. Maybe you're a mortgage broker or whatever, or you have lots of transactions. Well, who's going to be a good customer? Who's going to be a bad customer? What's a fraudulent loan application look like versus a legitimate loan, right? And you can look for those patterns in huge amounts of data. When you have, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of transactions, the AI can pick up those patterns and it can say, hey, this looks fraudulent, right? So it can identify things that a human can't identify. And that works across lots of different areas, credit risks, financial transactions, security, cybersecurity. Like, a lot of big organizations have lots of these incidents that are happening, and these patterns, they get all these alerts. Well, what's really, who's really attacking you versus what is normal activity, right? And it may seem obvious, but it's not always obvious, right? Because the attacks can be so subtle. So part of machine learning and AI can take a large amount of data and broil it down and give you an insight. Like, it can be as simple as, you have a company that is trying to do planning for capacity in your weather dependent. Maybe you have a landscaping business, but you have a lot of different locations, a lot of landscapers, but you need to predict, well, when do I need people? When do I not need people? And you can use past weather patterns and new data and weather predictions to kind of say, well, how do I need to balance my employees, right? How do I need to balance my supply and my demand? Or if you have a large number of potential customers and you have a big database of customers, how do you prioritize? How do you know who's a good customer, right? So AI can do stuff like that. And then the other part of AI is one that is called cognitive AI, meaning it's about how humans interact with computers, right? So the first AI is looking at large amounts of transactions and data and trying to make predictions, right? And trying to identify patterns. And the second kind is saying, make it easier for me to interact with the computer. So you have like a conversational assistant, right? A bot, a chat bot. But these things are pretty bad today, right? They're not good. They fail. You can get some stuff with Siri, and you get stuff with Alexa, and you can do speech search, right? You can search verbally, you can do all that stuff. But a lot of the bots are not very good. And there's a scenario in my book where we know one day they're going to be good, right? They're going to be really good. They're going to be conversational. It's going to be like interacting with people. But the point is, they don't think. There's no cognition. They're called cognitive AI, which really makes it sound like they're thinking, but there's no thinking, right? It reduces the cognitive load on a human. What's the cognitive load? It's easier to do the task or the job without overworking your brain, right? Cognitive load, it's like cognitive computing, or whenever you're making things easier for people, you're making it easier on their brains, and you're reducing what's called the cognitive load. You don't have to think, right? So that's what we're trying to do when we have these bots and virtual assistants that you can ask questions of. And that one day will be like on Star Trek, where you can ask questions of the computer and the computer will give you answers. But the only way to do that is to actually tell the system what the answer is, right? So you have to program it to do all that stuff. And that's where, chatbots are dumb, right? They're a channel. They're only as good as the information that you have. So let's say you're trying to find, maybe you're, in terms of, maybe you're a fire inspector and you need to know what the codes are for a particular building, or you need to see if something meets code, right? It's getting that reference material rather than opening up a book. You could ask a virtual assistant, right? You could do that. Or if you're an insurance adjuster, you can take a picture, of an accident, and these applications can give you estimates, automatically, right? That's a little bit different. That's more visual recognition. But the point here is that, we can use these things to make it easier for you to get answers, right? Whenever you go to a website and you say, oh, this website's really great, it's because somebody thought through what your task was and what you were trying to do and who you were. And we have to do the same thing with these virtual assistants and these cognitive applications, right? We have to program them. We have to tell them they're dumb without the information. So we have to tell them what the answers are. And so that's why it requires knowledge. And so a big part of this is, how do you structure and organize the knowledge that's needed in your business? And how are you going to make that knowledge and information available to your customers and to your employees? And there's a lot of work that's being done in that area right now. There's a lot of that work being done in call centers, right? So, that's an area we're going to see a lot more of that as well. And they're going to be better. One day they're going to be good. That's the nature of technology. It just gets better and better and better, right?
Yeah, well, let's rewind a little bit. In your business right now, is it the same entity that you started? Is it your first business iteration?
I know, it's funny. I just talked to a guy today who have sold 7 different businesses that all started with the same ideas, right? And yeah, this is my business, right? And this is the one that I've been building over the years. And we've reinvented it a lot, right? Like we used to do work with back in the day with Lotus Notes, and IBM. I don't know if you remember that, but
Yes.
you used to say Lotus did poorly when nothing else could do at all, And then we worked at Microsoft and we built SharePoint applications and that sort of stuff. And then we started getting into what's called semantic technology, which is building out all of these different organizing principles so that you can use natural language to get results, right? And you can improve search and you can improve information findability. Some of the work we do right now is with large organizations that have big product catalogs, like, the Honeywells of the world or the 3Ms of the world, or the HEBs or Walmart, that have large amounts of products, and you want to make those products easier to find. So that's kind of a bread and butter project for us, is organizing those product catalogs.
And what is the name of your organization?
It's called Early Information Science, and it's Early is spelled EARLEY. Don't forget the E before the Y. So it's early.com, but with an E before the Y. So it's Early Information Science. And again, we work in areas of content. And so getting back to when did I want to go into artificial intelligence, I really never thought of it from that perspective. I always thought of it from the information and the information architecture perspective. Like, just like if you're going to build a house, you don't start digging holes and pouring foundations. You have a design, you have a plan, maybe you hire an architect. We're the architects to build the information house, right? When you look at a website or you look at any application, you have to have certain foundational structures in place, right? And so, it's just like understanding the requirements, and you need different plans. Just like if you're building a house, you need a foundation plan and a framing plan and an HVAC plan and a wiring plan and plumbing and all of these different views of that construction. And the same thing happens in our information world, right? We're building a website or building an application or building a knowledge base. We need to have these different views. We need to build out different elements of that architecture. So that's what we do. We're the architects. And I wrote an article a number of years ago called "There's no AI without IA." There's no artificial intelligence without information architecture, right? Because the machines can't figure out what's important to the business. They don't know your products. They don't know your services. They don't know your solutions. So you have to tell it that. You have to define that stuff. And that's where the architecture comes in. So, right now people are calling it hybrid AI, because they're saying, well, it's machine learning plus, they call it symbolic AI, which is just a fancy name for knowledge, right? Just knowledge representation, meaning, how do you describe these things? Like, here's a contract. Well, if I had 1,000 contracts in a pile, like, a contract is what it is. If I hand it to, this is the isness. If I had 1,000 contracts in a pile and I want to put them in smaller piles, how would I tell them apart? Well, maybe it's contract type. Maybe it's a real estate contract versus an employment contract, right? And then maybe it's geography, or maybe it's if it's a project, maybe it's a statement of work, or maybe it's a size project or type of project, right? So that becomes what's called the aboutness, and that is the information architecture, right? It's isness and aboutness, and that's how you describe everything. and every organization, you have to build what are called taxonomies, which is just a hierarchy. It's just a way of describing the terminology and the things that are important, the product categories. Think of Boston is in Massachusetts, which is part of the United States. That's a hierarchy. That's called a taxonomy, right? And so in organizations, you build, taxonomies that describe all your different products, services, locations, document types, employees, customers, right? Different types of customers. So all of those things have to be defined in order for AI to work. And that's the foundational work that needs to happen. People need to build their knowledge. They need to get their knowledge house in order, and they need to be able to build the architecture. And those are the pieces that are necessary for any digital business.
It's interesting what you were just saying. So I'm going to sum it up a little bit and add a little bit to it, just for clarification. So you help other companies or organizations develop their AI by taking their information and creating really a foundation for all of that AI to operate off of. Or
Absolutely.
it's the skeleton and the musculature and all of that.
That's right. In fact, we call it the scaffolding. It's the knowledge scaffolding, right? It's like all the categories that you put documents on and all your information on.
But behind all of that are, people like you or your team that goes in and flushes out all of that information.
That's right.
That is important. And
that's right.
So that's what's really interesting to me is knowing the right questions to ask to get the executives or whoever is really putting this stuff in place and putting it into action. What questions do you ask to get the right information?
That's right.
To utilize.
That's right. That's critical. And so what we do is we build what are called scenarios and use cases. And use cases, well, what do you have to do? It's like a day in the life. What do you have to do? You're an insurance underwriter. Well, you need prior claims data, and you need, loss histories, and you need risks, and you need to know the policy, and you need to know all these different factors. You need to know about the business, right? Those are use cases. I need this information. So if whatever your job is, what are the things you need to find in order to produce your output, your work, right? If you're a marketer, you need to know about, the markets and the business types and the messaging and information about the product and, what the right channel is. If you're an attorney, you need to know about case law, and you need to know prior examples of these cases, and you need to know the facts of the current suit. You need depositions, and you need, documentation. You need all these things to do your job. And so that's the use case, right? And so everything boils down to, what is it you need to do your job day to day, right? What is that information that you need? And if you don't have that information, you're either going to be stuck, or you got to ask somebody, or you got to find it, or you got to create it again, right? And that causes friction. That causes, problems with productivity, right? So the whole idea is making it easier for people to find that information, making it easier for it to flow throughout the entire organization. But asking those questions, like, what do you need? What's your biggest pain point? What's your problem, right? Are the things that help you get to that place where you can say, this is the information people need. And then again, if I take a kind of information and I say, well, how do I tell 1,000 of those things apart? The isness, how do I tell 1,000? That's when you put it in other piles and you define the aboutness, right? And that is the information architecture. And then you can do things like, if you think of it from a product perspective, like, you can search on brand and price and size and color, and style, right? Those are all aboutness, right? If it's a shirt, well, what are the things I can tell you about a shirt? If I have 1,000 shirts in a pile, all color, size, style, price, brand, right? Those are all those attributes. So defining all those things about products or information is really the place to start making it easier to find that stuff.
Can we dig in a little bit to your book, The AI Powered Enterprise? Now, who did you write this book for?
Well, it's funny. I wrote it to help to explain to businesses what they need to do to be successful with AI. And it's more about the IA. It's more about the information architecture. And people, it's funny because some business people think it's too technical, and some technical people think it's not technical enough. So I kind of missed both ends. But sometimes I find someone in that sweet spot who understands those pieces. But it's basically, examples. It's case studies. It's talking about work we did for Applied Materials. So they had, 3,000 field service reps, right? And these techs had to go out and fix semiconductor fabrication plants, right? The chip manufacturing, the chip fabs. And so what they would do is they'd fill their truck with all these expensive parts because they didn't exactly know what the problem would be. And then when they got into the plant, many times they had to go back to their, back someplace. They couldn't even bring a laptop into the plant because they're ultra clean. So they have to go somewhere else to find the information. Then they had to look in 14 different systems to find the information they needed. So what we did is we created one system that you could look for the information you needed, and we had to structure all of the information, all of the content. That ended up reducing the time they spent looking for information to fix the plants by 50%. They went from 16 hours per week to 8 hours per week. Times 3,000 field service reps ended up saving them about $50 million per year. And that made it into a Harvard Business Review case study, or not a case study, but an article. And which is recently selected from one of their archive editions, the best of HBR, about data infrastructure. Is your data infrastructure ready for AI? And if you don't have those pieces, right? If you don't have those taxonomies, and when you take all the taxonomies and you put them together and you have a relationship, it's called an ontology. It describes the domain of knowledge, right? So for them, it was, part types and symptoms and assemblies and regions and customer types, and I don't even remember all of them, but there was about 25 different dimensions to those taxonomies, and all of that was foundational. We built a virtual assistant for Allstate many years ago called Allstate Business Insurance Expert, and that had to do the same thing. We had to take the content and we had to tag it with all these different taxonomies, right? And business type and policy type and region and risk and product and all the different things that they needed to find the answer, right? To underwrite a policy. And that was a very, very successful project because it started with that architecture. And that's what we're doing for organizations now, building digital assistants that really leverage this information architecture. So yeah, the book is about how to build these things, right? And it's not just about AI, it's about all sorts of systems, but it's about how you use information architecture to prepare for AI, right? So it's really about what the business needs to do. How do you manage these things? How do you govern them, right? How do you do change management? How do you build those architectures? How do you build use cases? There's lots and lots of different, procedures and tables, lots of things that are really hands-on and very specific. And that's what people have liked about the book, because it's kind of like a manual, to doing a lot of these things.
And you were saying that people that are very technical didn't find that it was technical enough, and those that aren't really into the technical side of things thought that it was too technical. But when you got the Axiom business book silver medal.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that though you might have a couple of critics, I'd say that they're probably not that many.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of very good feedback and a lot of 5-star reviews on Amazon, and I've gotten a lot of praise for the book. So I'm being a little bit facetious, because sometimes when I do talk to the people who are kind of in the weeds of really heavy data engineering and computer engineering and building out those algorithms, and the real heavy hitter computer scientists, it's not for them, right? Yeah. It's more for the business side to say, this is what you need to do before you're bringing those guys in. And it's understanding the problem. It's understanding the business problem. It's understanding the use case, right? It's all of that stuff, and how to measure it, how to measure business value. it's a big part of what I talk about is ROI. How do you justify these things?
So the executive that buys this book,
Mhm.
he gives it to his computer engineering team. Are they going to be able to do what you do without you?
Well, that's a good question. I just interviewed somebody the other day who said she's been using our material for years on her job, to do the things that she does. So people can take that information and apply it. Yes. But many times in the large organization, everybody has their day job, right? And sometimes it just takes that, external expertise, that external perspective to really catalyze the project and get it going and bring in a team who are specialists who can just knock it out, right? Because a lot of times organizations try some of these things. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. But the answer is a lot of people could, use this to do it themselves. I know my competitors do that. They use a lot of our stuff. I share a lot of our IP and I don't really care, but this is more that where that came from. But yeah, I think it depends on the business, right? It depends on their current capabilities. We have maturity models, so many times we assess where they are. Like, what is the capability that you have today, and can you implement this stuff? Or if you can't, what do you need to do to get ready to implement it? And that's a lot of times what we do. We say, okay, here's your roadmap. Here's the things you got to start with, right? Whether it's us, whether it's them, whether it's another company, but here's what you got to start with. You got to get this foundation right. And here are the next things you need to do. And then here are the things after that. And then there's always got to be quick wins along the way. You always have to be able to say, here's the business value, right? Can't just be the end of a big project and, oh, here's your nice Christmas present, right? You got to maintain buy-in, you got to maintain support, funding. So you have to be able to show business value as you go.
I asked that question, well, for a couple of reasons, but I just think it's really interesting. You can buy a book on just about anything,
Right.
and like, you can find really good ones that will, if you follow it step by step, you can do what it's telling you to
Right.
do. You don't necessarily want to do it,
Right.
but being able to, well, knowing your craft so well that you can lay it out and walk somebody through it is a skill all on its own, and shows a level of expertise and mastery that others don't have. So it's almost like a resume in my mind as you're talking about your book. And then, I think about, plumbers or roofers, I could read a book on that. Doesn't mean I want to do that stuff. Like, I leave it to the guys that do it all the time, because they'll get it done a lot quicker
That's right.
and a lot better than I
Yeah.
can do,
And that's a really good point. And the story I like to say, that's a great point, right? Like, you can give me a cabinet maker's tool bench, doesn't mean I'm a cabinet maker, right?
Yeah.
You give me all the tools and give me all the instructions, it doesn't mean I can do it. Or I remember and what that is, that's called tacit knowledge. That's the know-how that you get from experience. There's explicit knowledge, which is the stuff you write down. There's a tacit knowledge, which comes from experience. So an example of that is if you wanted to, I had my office plastered, right? And you see those guys on the stilts and they put the plaster on. But if you wanted to write down the steps, you take a big barrel, fill it with water, put plaster in, stir it up, put the plaster on a mortarboard and smush it on the wall, right? And smooth it out. And then, so that's it, a bunch of steps. You can write it out, a couple of pages. And I asked the plaster how long does it take to get proficient? He said 5 years, 3 to 5 years, right? That's the difference between tacit and explicit, right? That's the difference between reading about it and understanding the steps versus being able to do it. And you're right, it does, there's something that comes from the experience of doing it for so many years.
When did you start your business? You said Lotus, and I'm thinking
90s.
what was
90s, yeah.
Like 91, 92, 93. I mean, like I was taking what was that, Lotus 1, 2, 3 or something like
Lotus
that?
1, 2, 3, yep. Yep, Lotus 1, 2, 3. They had all those early desktop applications, and then they had Lotus Notes, and that was in the 90s. Yeah, so it was like early 90s, 93, 94. And so yeah, so it's been a while.
When you went to school, you said you studied chemistry.
That's right. Yeah.
Where was the transition?
To technology. Yeah. Well, I went to graduate school for business. I got an almost MBA. I was a course short, and I remember the teacher saying it was market research. And he said nobody who has ever taken an incomplete in this class has ever completed it. And I also followed that. And when I went back a couple of years later to finish, they'd changed their accreditation, and they wanted me to start all over. And I said, I don't need to do that. So I had my almost MBA, 2 years full-time marketing concentration. So it was always about business and anything technical. Like so, the scientist in me loves technology. I love to learn things, and I love to figure things out, and I love to solve problems. And it was really starting out by looking at knowledge, right? Because Lotus Notes was really a knowledge management application. It was one of the first ones out there. And it was started with isness and aboutness, right? You had to define a document. You had to say, well, what is this document about? Then you had to define, it's called metadata, the metadata on the document. So it was always about knowledge and knowledge processes, and then understanding the business side, right? So I had done some consulting work at a graduate school. I worked for a small systems integrator, database management company, and I was in sales and marketing. And then I just learned and taught myself more and more. I taught myself to learn to teach Lotus Notes and application development and systems administration. And sometimes I was only just a couple pages ahead in the book, from the class, but followed the process. And whenever people would ask me questions in class that I knew I should know, but I didn't, like they'd ask me a network question, and I'd say, who's our networking expert in the class, right? And I would turn it back to those guys. So I dodged those bullets that way. But there were times when they found big holes in my knowledge. And what was really interesting is I was teaching classes, and I got certified in Lotus Notes and application development 1, 2, systems administration. And I had to self-study and fill in a lot of my gaps because they didn't have traditional computer technology training. And I went to this company at the time where I was doing some teaching, but they were a consulting firm, and I wanted to get a job. And I said, I'd like to, work for you in marketing. He goes, well, why should I hire you? And I said, well, I'm a scientist at heart. I know how to learn, I know business, blah, blah, blah. And he said, how much money do you want? And I said, $40,000. And this is big money back then. He goes, oh, that's way too much money for us. Number one, I billed them over $100,000 that year just by teaching at the classes at their facility. And then he said to me, you will never, ever have credibility with the CIO, not a chief information officer. And I'm like, okay, that's what he thought. Well, in 1998, I spoke at the Lotus IBM Technology Forum, and it was to do knowledge transfer between Lotus and IBM. I got the highest evaluations of the conference, and in the audience was the office of the CIO at IBM. Like I called down to Armonk, New York, because they were having trouble with Lotus Notes deployments. And I got grilled by 10 people in the office of the CIO. And they ended up hiring us, and they called us their SWAT team. We ended up fixing their global deployments on some of these Lotus Notes applications. And so I went from, you will never have credibility with the CIO, to being the SWAT team of the most well-known CIO in the world, right? Of IBM, so.
Oh, that's awesome.
Isn't that something? Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Yeah, but don't let people tell you can't do something, and don't let your background, slow you down, stop you, because you've never done it before. I never did anything I never did. Like when I first started the business, I didn't have any experience, So if my team ever says, well, we've never done that, I say, well, we've never done anything, until we've done it. Right.
Well, for those future computer engineers out there, what advice would you give them?
I think it's going to be really important to have people skills, and to be able to understand business. And so a good combination is, taking marketing, learning business analysis, learning to be a business analyst, learning about interpersonal communications and relationships. It's really about people. You may go to technology because you don't like people, or maybe you're too insecure around people, right? Maybe it's easier to be in your own world, right? And a lot of technology people are like that. They're in their world. They don't want to interact socially because of whatever reason, right? Whatever trauma or baggage. But it's really important to have those people skills. It's really important to learn how to communicate and to communicate your ideas and to interpret other people's ideas and to be able to translate those into solutions, right? So I think that's the most important thing. It's going to get easier to do coding because there are so many no code applications. Of course, the algorithms, the deep, heavy duty computer engineering algorithms are always going to be there for people to optimize and to improve upon. But I think a lot of people who are going into technology, you don't necessarily need that. You need people skills and you need to know how to do configuration. So you need to understand business problems and solutions.
In your opinion, how best would an introverted computer engineer go about gaining those people skills?
Well, I think it's taking humanities courses, right? I think it's taking literature. I think it's studying history. I think it's understanding human nature, psychology. Take psychology courses, right? Those are all the things that will help you. Take creative writing, right? Take English literature. I mean, it's really rounding yourself out. Take courses that are not related to technology, but they're related to business and related to people. And of course, put yourself out there, right? Try for internships where you work with a business analyst, right? And try to stretch yourself, right? Try to get outside that comfort zone, and start networking early. Start connecting with people on LinkedIn. Early in your career, you build those networks, and those networks can last a lifetime. Those people, those connections.
It's interesting because early in our conversation, we established that at the root of what you do is communication.
That's right.
Being able to pull information out of your clients so that you're able to build what they need.
That's right. That's right. That's all about communication. Yep. Interpretation, and it's good communication skills and transparency. And the other thing is, always own your bad news, right? Always, if you've not, achieved something or something's going wrong, it's like, bring that bad news to the customer or to your boss. Never hide it, right? Own your bad news and be the one to call it out, and manage expectations, right? If you can't make a deadline, say so before the deadline. Don't miss the deadline and then say, oh, I couldn't do it. It's coming up, you can't do it. You got to reset those expectations, right? So managing expectations is all about communication, right? And being able to be honest with yourself, right? Intellectually honest. And of course, transparency and honesty are just core. Those core values that you have to walk into your work environment with, and any relationship with, really.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you feel is important to share with the audience before we go?
I think we had a pretty far-ranging conversation. I think if people are looking at AI from a business perspective, don't get snowed, don't get BS'd, right? Know what the business value is, know what the inputs are, know what the outputs are, know what the business value is. If people say, oh, it's proprietary, or I can't explain that, or it's magic, or it's black box, you need to know what the inputs and what the outputs are. You need to understand your process before you try to buy a tool, right? Because you can't automate a mess, and you can't automate what you don't understand. So you need to understand that process. Then you can look for where AI can fit in. And that's when you can talk to vendors and say, I need to solve this specific problem. So don't be snowed by that. And if you're going into the field, there's a lot of opportunity across many, many different areas. You don't have to have deep technical knowledge. You can do this from a business analyst perspective. But again, it's try to grow your skills and try to get outside your comfort zone, and always be open to learning new ideas and new things. I think it's probably something we can all apply.
Now, for all those listening, the best place to connect with you would be your website, Earley.
Or LinkedIn. You can connect me on LinkedIn. I'm Seth Earley. So just look me up. I think there's only one Seth Earley on LinkedIn, SETHEARLEY. Don't forget the E before the Y. Or you can go to early.com and you can contact me there. Or my email address is just Seth early.com. So my first name at last name.com, but just Seth Earley, one word on LinkedIn will do it as well, or Seth.Earley on Instagram, or some other Seth Earley. I think there's one other Seth Earley in the world, but he's a young athlete. And I think he got the username Seth Earley on some app. I think it was a fitness app, might have been Whoop. Anyway, but
Nice.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, likewise. And for those that want to purchase your book, the AI Powered Enterprise, the Axiom Business Book Silver Medal winner, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, I'm sure anywhere you can buy a good book, find it there, huh?
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Seth. This was awesome having this conversation with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dave. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review.